private school, a famous city, a red hunting hat, and a teenage boy lost in his own mind. J.D. Salinger's A Catcher in the Rye encapsulates the trials and tribulations of being a teenager. As a result of a 60-year time difference, many of Salinger's terms would today be considered outdated. However, his colloquial style of writing typifies the adolescent voice and effortlessly captures the teenage way of thinking. Holden's distrust of authority mirrors the apprehension that most teenagers hold towards adults, Salinger effectively capturing adolescents' contradicting views through first-person narration of the novel. Using symbolism and characterization, Salinger expresses the disjointed and cynical thoughts of a teenager suffering with mental illness, commenting in 1951 on the influence of an issue that now shrouds our society. Over 60 years ago, when the term teens was just coming into fashion, Salinger created a character who was an ideal representative for the adolescent voice, his projection of the teenage way of thinking allowing the novel to transcend its own time period and go down in history as a timeless classic. Ladies and gentlemen, how many times in high school did you question your parents, or a teacher, or any authority figure? Despite a shift in vernacular, Salinger still communicates a candid interpretation of the adolescent voice and the suspicious outlook on authority. Whilst conversing with Mr. Spencer, Holden registers a difference of opinion with his teacher. Life is a game, boy. Life is a game that one plays according to the rules. Yes, sir. I know it is, I know it. Holden's inner thoughts are then shared. Game my ass, some game. Through the use of a metaphor, the author analogizes life to a game, highlighting the perspective that many teenagers routinely expect to hear from adults, that it is often better to conform than to overstep your own boundaries. Although outwardly confirming this idea to his teacher, the first-person narration of the novel describes Holden rejecting Spencer's perspective, Salinger appropriately using shortened speech and swearing to make Holden's voice sound more authentic, and in turn capturing the characteristic blasé mentality of adolescence. The teenage proclivity to question authority is not new. However, in today's society there has been a rise in this attitude, with movies such as Divergent perpetuating the idea of challenging and distrusting adult figures. This modern relevance further demonstrates Salinger's cognizance of typical teenage thinking, with the character of his novel sharing the ideas held by teens today. As demonstrated through Holden's actions, despite feelings of distrust, teenagers often subconsciously place value upon the opinions of authority figures. This typical train of thought is present when he sees an expletive upon the wall upon his arrival at Phoebe's primary school. I was afraid some teacher would catch me rubbing it off, and would think I'd written it, but I rubbed it out anyways. The repetition of the words rubbing, as well as the language choice of afraid, demonstrates Holden's distress over the incident, highlighting to the reader a sense of hypocrisy within his character, usually dismissing adult opinion, only to then be concerned about potential judgment. Salinger clearly illustrates the paradoxical nature of these classic teenage thoughts. The author's understanding of the adolescent propensity to garner resentment towards authority is reiterated by current research that dictates that nearly half of all millennials feel judged by adults for their life choices. This judgment from adults only propagates distrust that adolescents feel, the relevance of this idea a testament to the author's depth of insight into the young adult mind. Salinger is a spokesperson for the teenage way of thinking, with Holden acting as a mouthpiece in order to convey the adolescent voice and making comment on teenagers' conflicting views towards authority and adults. Salinger's focus on the issue of teenage mental illness and the pessimistic thought process gives reason as to why the novel is still studied by high school students today. While riding in a taxi, Holden shows signs of this depressive mentality, grievingly expressing, "New York's terrible when someone laughs on the street very late at night. You can hear it for miles. It makes you feel so lonesome and depressed." The juxtaposition of laughing and feeling lonesome and depressed characterizes Holden as fatalistic, revealing to the reader his distorted view of the world and demonstrating the psychosis of a mentally ill teen. Choosing the inclusive pronoun of you, followed by depressed, demonstrates that Holden is wanting to involve the reader in his opinion. Using a coping technique that many teenagers resort to today, Holden distances himself from his emotion and tries to justify his melancholy by suggesting that everyone would share his ideas. Despite teenagers often trying to shrug off the signs, as seen through Holden's stereotypical voice, mental illness is everywhere, in novels, on TV, at school, and at home. According to the American College Health Association, the suicide rate among young adults ages 15 to 24 has tripled since the 1950s. Despite both adolescence and mental illness both being relatively new concepts during the time of writing, Salinger was able to characterise Holden as authentic, the psychology of his mental turmoil relatable to teenagers for decades to come. Just like many teenagers, Holden's mental illness often intertwines with his thoughts for the future, the angst surrounding the transition between being a child and an adult only escalating his ideas. In describing to Phoebe what would make him happy, Holden curiously describes, "I'm standing on the edge of some crazy cliff. I'd just be the catcher in the rye and all. I know it's crazy, but that's the only thing I'd really like to be. I know it's crazy." Caught up in his own madness, Holden expresses his ideas through the somewhat confronting and confusing analogy of being a catcher in the rye. However, beyond the surface, it is evident that the cliff is in fact a symbol for adulthood, Holden only wanting to save children from phoniness and corruption. The repetition of the word crazy is also indicative of Holden's mental state, his true values disguised by his frazzled and manic delivery. While the concept of the cliff and the catcher could be considered as outdated, the feelings and expressions of the ideas remain entirely accurate to the teenage psychology, proving that Salinger has captured these attitudes and ideas accurately. In our society, 1/4 of teens will struggle with an anxiety disorder at some point in their lives, with more diagnoses a result of feelings such as isolation, being misunderstood, worry, and sadness. Without modern-day knowledge about the issue, Salinger was able to adeptly present the thinking of a mentally ill teenager, predicting 50 years before his time the relevance that this issue would hold to teenagers of today, whilst also creating a credible interpretation of the adolescent psyche. Upon its release in 1951, The Catcher in the Rye was a controversial novel written by an author who neglected the majority's conservative opinions and championed the importance of the teenage voice. Teenagers' dismissive mentality towards adults is conveyed through Salinger's use of first-person narration, and characterization allowed the author to offer the struggles of mental illness, precisely capturing the often cynical teenage way of thinking. The Catcher in the Rye has sold over 65 million copies. It is iconic, it is classic. For years to come, people will continue to dedicate blogs, essays, and conferences to the man who wrote about a boy in a red hunting out, to the author who managed to do what no one else had done before, genuinely express the adolescent voice and perfectly encapsulate the teenage way of thinking. Thank you.